Let me tell you about a friend of mine. He's the kind of guy who, remembers birthdays. He listens intently. Always the first to offer help.
The classic good guy.
Exactly. And he truly believed, that being a good man was the ultimate key. He followed the script: kindness, reliability, unwavering support. He was taught that these virtues were a kind of romantic investment.
That good behavior would earn him partnership, a social contract, really.
Right, but his reward wasn't a relationship. It was... Well, it was a series of gentle letdowns, each one praising his character. You're such a good listener. You're too good for me.
While quietly closing the door.
Yeah.
Yes.
He was just confused, hurt. He'd done everything right according to the rules he was given.
And then he saw something that broke those rules.
He did. He was at a party, and he watched this other guy. Loud, arrogant, a bit dismissive, just clearly playing by a different set of rules.
And he became the center of attention.
The magnetic center. The women there, including one my friend had admired for months, they were just drawn to him. It was visceral, almost instinctive. They laughed at his blunt jokes, leaned in to hear him talk.
And your friend?
He was standing there holding 2 drinks he'd fetched for someone who wasn't even looking at him anymore. And he had this chilling realization.
That it wasn't a moral competition.
Not at all. He realized he was in a different, colder game, like a biology experiment, and he was the control group. The one who followed the rules and failed.
And the man getting the results.
He wasn't following the social rule book. He was operating on a far older, darker algorithm.
And that moment of confusion, that gut punch of rejection, that's the hook, isn't it?
It is. It's the pain point that leads so many men down a very specific internet rabbit hole today. And our listener, the learner, send us a stack of sources examining exactly that darker algorithm. We're talking about the red pill philosophy.
Right, which exists in that larger, often virulently anti-feminist online network known as the Manosphere.
And that's why we're doing this deep dive.
That's right. This has moved way beyond niche forums. So our mission today is very specific. We're undertaking a clinical and detached analysis of how this community operates.
Looking at the core ideas.
The core ideological frameworks, yeah. And analyzing precisely how they selectively appropriate, and often, let's be honest, severely misinterpret concepts from evolutionary psychology and even basic economic theories.
All to construct this adversarial worldview about gender.
A comprehensive, prescriptive, and adversarial worldview. We're committed to separating the often extreme rhetoric from the verifiable academic facts. It's about understanding the system and its consequences, not endorsing the ideology itself.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start with the core metaphor they use, borrowed, of course, from the Matrix.
It's foundational. Yep. This whole narrative of awakening is the basis for their entire belief system.
So we need to define the delusion versus the supposed enlightenment.
It is that foundational narrative. It's about self-actualization through painful truth. They divide the world into 2 camps defined by a choice.
Yeah.
You are either sleeping in the system,
or you have awakened to reality.
Exactly.
So the sleeping state, that's the blue pill. They define this as what they call the great fabrication, or the century lie.
Sometimes summed up by a Chinese concept they adopt. Brisem.
Which means virtue is attraction.
Precisely. This is the mainstream socially accepted idea. It's the narrative pushed relentlessly by Hollywood, romantic comedies, the media, your family.
Everywhere, basically.
Everywhere. The idea that kindness, sensitivity, empathy, obedience, that these things inherently lead to sexual reward. The belief that being a reliable, emotionally supportive man is enough.
But for those who take the red pill, this isn't just a mistake. It's a systemic deception. It has a purpose.
Oh, absolutely. According to their ideology, this moral education is viewed explicitly as a massive castration operation.
That's strong language.
It's an act of social engineering. It's intentionally designed to suppress men's natural competitive and sexual aggression. They claim the system needs compliant, non-threatening, predictable men.
What they call worker ants or good slaves.
Right. Not sexually potent or challenging males. So in this worldview, the pursuit of kindness is fundamentally a reproductive dead end.
And this leads them straight to their highly politicized take on feminism. You noted in the sources, they see it not as a liberation movement, but as a deliberate, organized sexual strategy.
That's the claim. A startling one. They see it as a sophisticated collective strategy designed to maximize female outcomes while minimizing costs to them.
How so?
They argue that feminism exists primarily to disguise what they call the myth of female oppression. And by leveraging this myth, they claim women are enabled to pursue their core genetic imperatives.
Which TRP defines as what? seeking desirable mates and resources.
Exactly. Seeking high-value mates and extracting resources while simultaneously masking the exploitation of men.
And the exploitation is the resource extraction.
Yes. In their view, the state driven by feminist ideology extracts resources from productive men. Think taxes, alimony, child support, all these mechanisms that essentially turn men into
automated money dispensers.
Right. Without demanding equivalent loyalty in return. And so TRP philosophy is positioned as the necessary countermeasure. It's the antidote.
So if feminism is the collective female strategy, then the red pill TRP is explicitly defined as the pragmatic men's sexual strategy.
It's the rational response to what they see as a stacked deck.
And to do that, they need to frame it as intellectually legitimate.
Of course. They insist their entire philosophy is based on pragmatism and truth based on observation. They try to align themselves with scientific and deductive reasoning,
which they label the masculine side of inquiry.
And they deliberately oppose this to idealism and values, which they call feminine traits.
The traits of snowflakes or hamsters who can't accept biological reality?
That language is crucial. A hamster to them is someone who uses mental gymnastics rationalization to make uncomfortable reality fit their preferred morality.
So a red pill adherent claims to value the cold, hard, objective truth no matter how painful.
And central to that authority is their belief that understanding evolutionary psychology is the key. The science, even if it's cherry-picked or misinterpreted, provides the clout of absolute authority.
Okay, let's move to section 2 then. Let's decode the core biological argument they use, because this is where they try to explain the phenomenon we started with, why the nice guy fails.
It all centers on the dual mating strategy.
The dual mating strategy.
This is the centerpiece of their whole theoretical building. In their community, it's abbreviated as AFBB.
Alpha fucks beta bucks.
Exactly. It's a primary concept they pull from EP to explain that jerk versus nice guy paradox. They take an academic hypothesis and turn it into a rigid operational rule.
So let's lay out the two parts of that strategy as they see it, starting with the good genes pathway.
Okay, so the theory posits that women have this biological, unconscious drive for what they call good genes.
And that translates to what exactly?
It means pursuing short-term mating with men who exhibit high genetic quality. So physical attractiveness, and this is key in their view, risk-taking qualities, confidence, dominance.
These are the guys they label the jerk boy alpha sperm donor.
That's the term. This impulse, it's focused on passion, on the potential for genetically superior offspring. And they claim it's maximized or prioritized during the ovulatory shift when a woman is most fertile.
So that covers the alpha fucks component. It's about excitement, the rush, the high status signal, getting the best genetic material.
Precisely. And then there's the second parallel drive, and that is for good dad material.
The other side of the coin.
Right. This drive dictates seeking long-term partners who are reliable, emotionally supportive, predictable, and critically economically stable. So this is the men they call the dependable beta money dispenser.
The beta bucks.
The beta bucks. This channel is purely about security, survival, long-term provisioning.
So the deep, painful paradox is built right into our wiring, according to them.
That's their interpretation, yes.
The very traits that make a man an ideal long-term provider, kindness, predictability, safety, are the same traits that fail to activate that good genes channel.
And in fact, they believe they actively kill sexual tension. You become the reliable ATM, the predictable comfort, but not the desired mate.
Which is the core conclusion they draw. It's the reason they believe that blue pill conditioning is such a fatal trap for men.
It is. If you only provide those good dad characteristics, you are, in their view, sexually inert. You're doomed to be the friend or the provider, but never the object of passion.
And that logic then drives the necessity of developing the traits that signal that good genes quality.
Which leads them directly to the embrace and the cultivation of the dark triad.
And this is where it gets really interesting and frankly ethically complex. They're advocating for what society normally sees as toxic or pathological traits.
They are. They link narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy directly to sexual success. They treat them as high-status signals.
Let's break down how they rationalize each one.
They see these traits as highly functional in what they call the sexual market. First, you have narcissism.
Okay.
They argue that extreme confidence, even bordering on delusion, and an unwavering sense of self-worth, well, they're interpreted by a woman's primal instincts as high-status signals.
Regardless of whether that confidence is actually based on merit.
Exactly. The ability to bluff success convincingly is seen as success itself. It's the projection of invincibility.
Okay, what's next? Machiavellianism.
Second, Machiavellianism. This is all about strategic unpredictability. Calculated manipulation, transactional interactions.
Just keeping her off balance.
That's the idea. They suggest this intentional unpredictability creates an emotional roller coaster. They argue this instability, the rush of uncertainty, the need to constantly chase the man's approval, that's the source of addictive dopamine spikes in the woman.
So stability is seen as an aphrodisiac. It's boring.
Precisely. And that brings us to the final and most chilling component, psychopathy or low empathy.
And this is linked to?
It's linked fundamentally to the concept of outcome independence. This trait signals that the man is independent of the relationship's outcome.
Meaning he can turn and walk away.
Without emotional consequence, without distress. This perceived controlled danger and lack of emotional dependence signals that the man's needs are placed above the relationship.
And they think this generates sexual tension.
Powerful sexual tension, they claim, because it communicates genuine internal strength, freedom, and an inability to be controlled.
So if you can cultivate all three of these dark triad traits, you're basically reverse engineering the alpha signal. You're communicating, I am a high-value man who doesn't need you.
Which paradoxically makes you more desired within this model. That is a core prescriptive theory.
But we can't just stop there. We have to apply the academic critique. Where does the manosphere deviate from actual scientific rigor here?
Oh, this is critical. They make at least 3 crucial mistakes when they appropriate EP. This is where the science becomes rhetoric.
So what's the first mistake?
The first, and perhaps most academically egregious error, is the confusion between the ultimate and the proximate explanation for behavior.
Okay, that sounds a bit like jargon. Can you break that down for our listeners?
Certainly. Let's use an analogy. If you see a car moving, the ultimate explanation for why it's moving is, the ancient human drive for mobility, for gathering resources, for territorial expansion. It's the evolutionary why.
Okay.
The proximate explanation is the conscious behavior. The driver consciously chose to turn the key and press the accelerator to go to the grocery store today. That's the immediate how.
I see. So the big picture versus the immediate action.
The manosphere confuses the two constantly.
Yeah.
They'll take a hypothesized ultimate genetic drive, like a woman's deep unconscious imperative to secure good genes.
The evolutionary why.
And they just leap to presenting it as women consciously, maliciously, and strategically plotting to exploit men in their daily lives.
So they assume intentional cruelty instead of just ancient unconscious biology at work. They translate evolutionary noise into a modern conspiracy aimed specifically at them.
Exactly. By blurring that line, they turn a scientific hypothesis about unconscious drives into a direct justification for resentment.
And the second flaw.
They present hypothesis as undeniable fact. The dual mating strategy, the ovulatory shift research, the sexy son hypothesis. These are all topics of ongoing scientific debate.
With competing ideas and mixed results.
Significant methodological challenges, mixed empirical results. But in the manosphere, they are presented as absolute undeniable scientific truth. They're invoked with the full, unquestionable authority of science to vindicate their worldview. They rarely, if ever, discuss the conjectural nature of these ideas.
They strip away all the scientific caveats to create certainty.
Precisely. And the third major flaw is just the age-old sexual double standard, but it's dressed up in scientific language now. Manosphere discourse insists heavily on the immutable biological behavior of women. For example, they'll view female infidelity as an inherent biological reality. Cheating whores by nature.
But they conveniently omit any discussion of male evolutionary drives.
Completely. The male propension for short-term mating, sexual aggression, parental uncertainty, none of that gets the same critical analysis.
So it's a skewed vision of sex differences. Only female sexuality requires condemnation, while male actions are just game or strategic moves.
That's the rhetorical strategy. They present men as rational actors applying science, while women are reduced to purely emotional, fitness-maximizing biological automatons. It's a selective reading of science designed purely to validate a pre-existing resentment.
Which seems to lie less in biology and more in economics. That selective focus brings us perfectly into our next section, because the ideology marries that warped evolutionary view to a hardline economic one.
Creating a demoralized market where humans become commodities. This is the explicit neoliberal framing of sexuality.
So attraction, relationships, it's all just supply and demand.
It's a cold, amoral lens. They construct what they call the sexual marketplace.
And in this market, the goal is rational profit maximization, They're very clear about who is selling and who is buying.
Yes. Within this framework, women are framed as the sellers of sex and sexual access, and men are the buyers. It's an inherently transactional model.
And success is dictated by market logic, which they quantify using sexual market value, or SMV.
SMV is the absolute dictator of romantic success. It's the metric that reduces complex human beings into rationalized exchange values.
They're trying to put a number on a person's worth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
SMV quantifies a person's value based on a rigid set of criteria: physical attractiveness, financial success, social status, all converted into quantitative exchange value.
Which is where you get the HBX scale.
Right. Grading women's physical appearance, HB for hot babe, and X is a value from 1 to 10. The entire goal is to increase your own SMV while accurately grading the SMV of potential partners.
This commodification must have profound psychological effects. It turns people into interchangeable units.
It does. This relentless market logic facilitates the stripping of intimacy from human relationships. It really does transform women into exchangeable commodities.
And this gets taken to an extreme in some of their futurist predictions.
Yes, the sources note this is surprisingly common. They're predictions about technology.
What, like AI and robots?
Exactly. They seriously suggest that superior sex robots, AI companions, highly realistic VR, that these won't just be adequate substitutes for human women, but the ideal.
The ideal against which human women will inevitably be found wanting.
Because of their perceived emotional baggage, their irrationality, the high cost of maintenance, they predict a kind of cataclysmic sexual devaluation of women once the technological commodity becomes superior to the human product.
That just perfectly illustrates how this framework sees relationships not as partnerships, but as calculated exchanges.
And that market view directly informs their prescription for men. If the market is amoral and transactional, then emotional vulnerability is the ultimate liability.
Now let's talk about the deep, tragic irony here. This entire philosophy focused on hard, emotionless utility. It's built on suppressing a deeply felt human need.
This is the core internal conflict, the deep dissonance at the heart of the red pill ideology. The TRP documents themselves admit that men yearn deeply for emotional safety, for trust, for vulnerability.
They long for what they call a safe haven.
A safe haven where the struggle has no place. They want to stop fighting, to stop playing the game, just for a while.
That sounds incredibly human, but the ideology demands they suppress that.
Immediately. This desire for connection is characterized as a fatal weakness, a product of Disney-esque illusions and feminized conditioning. It must be ignored.
So the core prescription for men to succeed is to hold frame.
To achieve strength by successfully holding frame.
And what does that mean in practice?
Strength is equated entirely with the ability to ignore and suppress one's emotions and not betray any emotional vulnerability.
You have to maintain this stoic, rigid exterior.
So his partner can lean on him without ever sensing weakness. It means ignoring his own inclinations toward altruism or sympathy, and crucially, learning to redirect his partner's emotional cues if they conflict with his frame.
And this enforced emotional rigidity, this sociopathic mask, it leads to what the studies call Marcus's paradox.
The story of Marcus illustrates the profound psychological cost.
Tell us about him.
Marcus was a successful consultant, late 30s, who had fully internalized this worldview. Meticulous about outcome independence, presenting that dark triad ideal of detached competence.
And he got the short-term success the philosophy promised.
He did. He attracted women who were excited by his perceived lack of neediness, but he suffered profound, crushing loneliness. The success required the absolute suppression of his own emotional needs.
So what happened?
One night, he had a crippling panic attack. It was terrifying, physically overwhelming, and he felt completely alone in his fear. His partner was sleeping right next to him.
But he couldn't wake her up.
He couldn't.
Why?
Because sharing that moment of profound vulnerability, that utter lack of control, it would betray his frame.
Yeah.
It would confirm him as weak in the system he had sacrificed everything to master.
So the very mechanism that got him the mate prevents any possibility of intimacy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He had successfully become the detached tyrant, but that status meant he was perpetually alone. He could never, ever let his guard down.
That is just profoundly sad. The success mechanism itself creates a situation where genuine connection is literally impossible. It's success built on self-sabotage.
Dissociation and internal fracture. And that dissociation is key. The sources argue that constantly monitoring your own behavior to fit a rigid, amoral script the game. It destroys the authentic social intelligence you need for a genuine connection.
It replaces it with mechanical, rehearsed actions. So let's discuss the tactical application of this, the game aspect, specifically around boundaries and consent, which is where this becomes overtly harmful.
Game hinges on the reinterpretation of rejection. Men are taught to anticipate what they call shit tests or rapport breaks.
Which they don't see as genuine rejection.
No. They're defined as female instinctual probes into a man's boundaries, a way to test his persistence, his confidence, his internal frame, his good genes.
So if a man responds to rejection by apologizing or backing off, he fails the test.
He fails. He's confirmed as good dad, material submissive, eager to please, but sexually undesirable. The man is instructed to ignore these protestations, maybe even laugh them off.
To communicate his genetic fitness, that her negativity doesn't faze him.
Right, that he dictates the reality of the interaction. And this dangerous logic culminates in the core ideological stance that rejection is not rejection.
Which is incredibly harmful when you apply it to sexual boundaries.
Yes. They often invoke the concept of last-minute resistance, which posits that a woman might explicitly decline consent, not because she doesn't want sex, but to save face, to avoid being seen as promiscuous.
So in this framework, no can come to mean yes.
It can, because the man's face and the red pill's principles gets prioritized over the woman's actual stated boundaries.
And the sources are clear that this mindset, coupled with the resentment against women, predicts higher levels of hostile sexism.
And rape myth acceptance, yes. The linguistic analysis of their forums confirms it. Posts have a much higher frequency of negative emotion words associated with status and clout.
There's an overwhelming concern with increasing status.
And an explicit focus on how a man can manipulate a situation or a person to his favor. Machiavellianism to them is a synonym for manipulation, and they justify it by viewing women as inherently manipulative and deceitful by nature.
So the ideology provides a cognitive shield against any accountability.
It does.
Okay, let's pivot to section 4. We've detailed the ideology, but we haven't really talked about why it's so successful today. It would have stayed in niche forums without the technology that promotes it.
Which brings us to algorithmic extremism.
This shift is critical.
It is. The Manosphere has been around since the early internet, but its recent ubiquity is a direct result of modern social media design. Short-form video platforms, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Reels, they changed the game.
They took a fringe philosophy and made it mainstream content. And the key to that is the recommender algorithm.
It's the delivery mechanism. These algorithms use machine learning to predict user interests, but their primary objective is profoundly cynical.
It's not to serve the most factual or relevant content.
No. It's to optimize engagement, to keep you scrolling, reacting on the platform for as long as possible to maximize ad revenue.
And what kind of content best optimizes engagement?
Digital marketing analytics consistently show that algorithms prioritize content that is emotionally charged, controversial, polarizing, novel.
Content that generates the most immediate attention, the most heated comment sections.
And therefore the highest commercial returns. It creates an environment that's optimized for rage bait.
So masculinity influencers are basically entrepreneurs in this attention economy.
Exactly. They actively game the algorithmic infrastructure. They're incentivized to create increasingly extreme, emotionally volatile, and polarizing content because extremity correlates directly with views and therefore profit.
And that broadcasts these once niche discussions into the everyday feeds of vulnerable young men.
Men who might be searching for something as simple as how to talk to girls.
This leads us right to the pipeline of radicalization, which we can understand through Liam's story.
Liam's story is a composite of common recruitment patterns from the research. He was a shy 16-year-old dealing with the intense, typical pain of heartbreak.
He goes online looking for answers.
And the algorithm senses his distress. It doesn't offer him clinical coping mechanisms. It offers him a narrative of blame. It reframes his personal misfortune as a systemic injustice,
where he's been domesticated and castrated by a feminized society that rewards bad men
and punishes good ones. The rhetoric takes his profound personal pain and channels it outwards. It gives him a quick fix and an external enemy.
A simple solution: become unapologetically manly, and assigns blame to women, feminism, society.
Precisely. This immediate validation of his pain channels his rejection sensitivity into hostility. Confusion becomes conviction. The consequence is he stops seeing his crush as a person with preferences.
And starts seeing her as a biological automaton.
Programmed to seek violence and dominance. This immediate radicalization makes the path to de-radicalization incredibly difficult. The ideology becomes an identity wrapped in a sea of insecurity.
And this vulnerability isn't just theoretical. The objective data confirms a genuine and significant mental health crisis among adherents, particularly in the incel subgroup.
The clinical data is alarming. Surveys show adherents report extremely high levels of poor mental health. Over 1/3 in one study meet the clinical threshold for moderate depression and anxiety.
And the isolation is profound.
Loneliness and rejection sensitivity are extremely high. Nearly half of participants selected the highest possible response for all 3 loneliness items on the survey scale.
And while we've talked about the outward hostility, the core harm often turns inward.
That is the critical finding. Despite the outward aggression, the primary risk of harm is directed toward themselves. A shocking, over 21% of the sample reported daily suicidal ideation.
It just highlights the self-defeating nature of the belief system.
These men, already high in rejection sensitivity, are clinging to a narrative that reinforces their self-loathing by viewing failure in mating as a fundamental biological failure of their inherent worth.
So the ideology attracts the vulnerable and then makes their mental health outcomes even worse. How do academics categorize the different psychological pathways that lead men into this?
They use a framework called the dual pathways hypothesis. It identifies 2 distinct psychological routes that lead to harmful attitudes like hostile sexism and the justification of violence.
Okay, what are the 2 pathways?
Pathway 1 is dispositional extremism. This route is driven by internal, fixed personality traits. These are individuals already high in the dark triad traits: narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism.
And they often have a pre-existing right-wing political orientation.
Yes, these men may be predisposed to misogyny and are actively seeking an ideology that validates their propensity for dominance.
So these are the men who already have the alpha traits and want a philosophical justification for using them.
They're seeking a roadmap for dominance. Then there's pathway 2, psychosocial vulnerability. This route is driven by lived experiences and specific psychological conditions.
Okay.
This group shows a higher incidence of autistic traits, a history of bullying and abuse in childhood, and critically low self-perceived mate value coupled with social anxiety.
So these men might turn to these networks not out of a desire for dominance, but as a response to profound rejection and isolation.
Seeking a community that validates their victimhood. What's crucial is that these 2 pathways, one dispositional, one experiential, both lead to the same toxic outcome.
Harmful attitudes and beliefs.
Yes. The sources note that poor mental health and ideological adherence were found to be twice as predictive of harmful attitudes as just online networking alone. It's the conviction that the system is broken, coupled with that internal pain, that drives the hostility.
And this entire framework creates a severe dissonance when put into practice, especially for men who are essentially kind or socially anxious, men attempting to mimic traits they don't have.
This is perfectly exemplified by the man we called Kevin.
The data analyst.
Right. Kevin's personality was closer to pathway 2, socially anxious, highly analytical, but lacking natural confidence. He swallowed the red pill whole and tried to reverse engineer attraction by mimicking the dark triad script.
He believed if he acted like an alpha, he'd get alpha results. What was his specific failure?
Kevin decided to apply the principle of controlled danger and strategic unpredictability on a first date. He believed being nice confirms you as a beta, so he intentionally created friction.
What did he do?
At dinner, he decided to belittle the waiter service and then intentionally withdrew attention from his date mid-conversation to check his phone.
To signal his outcome independence and higher status. The high-status tyrant.
But the reality was the opposite. He didn't project controlled danger. He projected a socially awkward man being inexplicably rude to a service worker. It demonstrated low social intelligence and poor character, not high status.
And his date
was not impressed or aroused. She was socially embarrassed and left shortly after.
He stripped away the social intelligence needed for actual human connection and replaced it with a rigid, poorly executed script.
And he was left more isolated than when he started, clinging to the belief that the woman failed to recognize his biological value because she was too conditioned by the blue pill matrix.
Kevin's story proves that merely following the mechanical script, the game, it just destroys the capacity for genuine human interaction.
It confirms the ultimate failure of this ideology in fostering any kind of long-term well-being.
This has been an incredibly thorough and at times pretty sobering deep dive. So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together?
I mean, we've analyzed an ideology that successfully weaponizes legitimate psychological pain, the confusion and rejection faced by men like your friend, and it packages it using misinterpreted science and cold market logic.
It takes complex, multifaceted issues and reduces them to simple, adversarial rules.
It's a philosophy that promises success by encouraging the evolutionary suicide of kindness.
And the consequence of that reduction is profound, crushing isolation. The relentless pursuit of the alpha ideal, predicated on cultivating those dark triad traits and suppressing vulnerability. It directly undermines the possibility of long-term connection.
The central conflict here is that tension between the short-term amoral signals of mating success, which is what the dark triad supposedly provides, and the psychological requirements for actual human intimacy, trust, and happiness.
The quest for a high SMV results in a self-defeating exercise in dissociation and loneliness.
As Marcus's and Kevin's stories demonstrated, the very strategy designed to secure a partner guarantees the impossibility of ever truly having one.
The ideology provides a simple, satisfying, but ultimately destructive answer to a complex world. They seek certainty, but they only find greater misery.
And that's the final provocative thought we can leave you with based on this material. The Manosphere seeks monocausal scientific certainty, a single algorithm, to explain the tangled, messy web of human relationships.
But our deep dive shows the answer isn't a simple, destructive script like dark triad equals love.
No, it's a messy, complex reality rooted in psychological vulnerability, genuine confidence, and the capacity for nuanced connection. If you are struggling with rejection, the ideology promises a quick fix based on becoming a ruthless, dominant figure.
But we've seen the cost of that mask. So the question is, what are you willing to sacrifice in the pursuit of simplicity, your principles, your genuine capacity for connection, or your own long-term psychological well-being?